welcome to Half Hour with today. Today, a very interesting movie that we're going to be talking about. Already the winner of so many accolades. It started right at the Sundance Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award in the documentary section, and well deserved indeed, winning nominations all over the place and awards. It's called Crip Camp, and that's what we're going to talk to the filmmakers today, and very excited to have them here. This movie is a Netflix movie and also produced by Higher Ground, which happens to have the Obamas behind that company, and not a bad deal here, guys. So first, I want to mention that we have a representative, Candace, from ASL, American Sign Language. Hi, Candace, joining us today. And I am Pete Hammond. I am the chief film critic and awards columnist for Deadline. And very, very happy to be here to talk about this extraordinary film today. Now, we have the co-directors here, and let me just have them tell you a little bit about themselves before we show a bit of the film. So this is Jim. Jim, hi.
Hi, I'm Jim Lebrecht, and for our folks that are blind or low vision, I like to describe myself. I'm a 64-year-old white guy with square glasses on. I've got a gray goatee and a black shirt with white pattern on it, and behind me is a red wall with a bunch of posters.
Hi, yeah, I'm Nicole Newnham, and I am a middle-aged white woman with brown hair down to my shoulders and round glasses on, sitting next to a bookcase with a Greek bouzouki hanging on the wall behind me.
Nice. Well, welcome. And before we talk about the movie on our show today on A Half Hour With, I want to give people a little piece of it here in case they haven't seen it. And what we love to do with this show is inspire people to watch it if they haven't seen it yet. It's available on Netflix and easy to find, and definitely one you'll want to see, especially if you haven't seen it and you listen to our discussion here. We'll try to keep away from too many spoilers, but this is real life we're talking about here. So let's take a look at a scene from Crip Camp.
Saying, wish I could go, wish I could go, wish I could go. And then when I went to Jeanette, it was like, there I was in Woodstock. The music and the people. I just feel like these people are crazy, you know? I mean, in a good way.
A girl at camp.
Come to Camp Jeanette and find yourself, you know?
A boy slides out of his wheelchair into a pool. Then he dives underwater amid other swimmers and those floating in life jackets. Past camper Denise Jacobson recounts. Subtitles read, "It was so funky, but it was a utopia. When we were there, there was no outside world." A black and white camp photo shows Denise as an 18-year-old beaming at the camera from her wheelchair.
All right, that's just a small taste of this movie. Jim, let me start with you because this idea came from you. Now, you are a celebrated sound designer working in the movie business, and it's so well versed of how films get made and things, but you thought, and you have a very personal connection to this subject matter, Camp Jeanette. Can you tell us your story there and how this came about?
Yeah, I've been, there's an incredible documentary community in the Bay Area where I'm based, and I've been working in audio post for about 25 years now with my own company. And one of the people I worked with really early on was Nicole, and over the course of time, I have been her sound designer and mixer on 3 of her previous feature-length documentaries. And I'm working on everybody else's film, and I'm seeing the power of documentary film. And I've certainly worked on and seen a few films about disability, but I thought that there was a story there that hadn't quite been told. And when Nicole was wrapping up The Revolutionary Optimist, her last film, I took her out to lunch and I was pitching her all these ideas of, gee, Nicole, maybe you want to do a documentary about non-disabled siblings of disabled people because I know my sister's experience and such. Anyway, after lunch, really offhandedly, I said, Nicole, I've actually always wanted to see a documentary about my summer camp. That there was this group of people from New York that I went to camp with who migrated from New York out to Berkeley. And I think there's a big connection with the disabled civil rights movement. And that story and that idea, like, the really caught Nicole's attention.
Nicole, I have to ask you how it did. You are an Emmy award-winning news documentary producer. You've done a lot of these things. What was it about that pitch?
You know, I think the way Jim painted a picture in my mind of what Camp Jened was like when I asked him, why do you want to make a film about your summer camp? And to be honest, maybe there was a tiny little bit of an eye roll in me at that moment, because I think plenty of people think their summer camp was this really important place, because it was to them, but that doesn't mean that everyone's summer camp needs to be a documentary. And Jim started telling me about Camp Jened. I really felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole into another world, because I realized I had no mental schema for a place that is a egalitarian hippie utopia for teenagers with disabilities, and their hippie counselors. It just, to me, it sounded, incredible that it ever existed. And then the fact that that seemed so radical and incredible to me indicated that this might be a way to kind of immerse an audience in a fun and surprising and compelling universe that could shift the way that they perceive people with disabilities, which was Jim's idea. And also, I loved working with Jim. I knew that any project that he was involved in would be full of, joy, humor, music. He was surrounded by Grateful Dead stuff in his mixing studio and had his, reggae beret on, and I just was attracted. Jim had made me fall in love with the idea of disability as a community and disability as a culture and disability as a civil rights issue. And I thought here would be a way to help other people have that kind of shift in their thinking that I had experienced.
And he became your co-director. How did that happen? How did you decide to, do something you don't normally do here necessarily, is collaborate as a director?
Yeah, I got really excited about the project, and I went home and I saw this Facebook page that all these Genetia camp had been, throwing their personal pictures onto for years. And it was even more exciting looking than Jim had described it, and I thought, this has to be done. At that point, we still didn't have the footage, but we were thinking, well, maybe we could recreate, shoot scenes with disabled actors and sort of recreate the camp for the viewer. And then, the more I thought about it, I thought, what's truly extraordinary here is that you have a documentary filmmaker, essentially, not a director, but somebody who was a vital part of the documentary community, who had seen and loved, and I had discussed so many documentaries with, and whose aesthetic choices I really loved, who had this incredible personal story. It was Jim's story, and I just felt like if we could tell the story from that personal point of view and relate this history, which is really one of the great civil rights stories of our time that too many people in our country didn't know, from the perspective of a disabled filmmaker and from his personal experience, that was actually the really extraordinary thing. So I said, would you co-direct it with me? And luckily Jim said, yeah. And that was really the moment when the project was born.
That was. And Jim, how did that collaboration work? How did you two work together in actually creating this film?
We forged this incredible, this incredible collaboration, and I think we both knew where our strengths were, or certainly I had real lack of knowledge. I was working on films once they were basically all edited and locked, and so I didn't really have the firsthand knowledge of the process. But you know, it just kind of fell into place naturally. I think because we really trusted each other, and that we really, you know, and for instance, like the narration in the film, none of it was really pre-written. We would talk about things, and then, and maybe we talk, and Nicole would type up something, we'd work on it, but often it was us kind of going back and forth with a recorder and a microphone right with us in the editing room. So, so like I said, I mean, I think complete trust in an incredible filmmaker whose work I really, really loved, and us knowing each other as friends.
That's very cool. I have to ask you guys, the footage is amazing. Did you have just common knowledge that this footage was out there? It's about 40 minutes that were in the film of almost cinema verite that is so key to it. The whole first half of the film really is made of this. Talk about getting that, because that's a dream for a documentary to have that.
Well, I mean, so for folks who haven't seen the film, in the summer of '71, this group of kind of hippie video, commune type people, they happened to bump into some folks from Camp Jeanette at a gas station, and they started talking and like, "Who are you? Who are you?" And we invited them, those campers and counselors, invited them over to our camp for the Camp Olympics. And when they showed up a couple of days later, they couldn't get in at first. And when they did, I don't want to have any spoilers, but the whole camp was upside down, and because two counselors had gotten the crabs, and so everybody's like quarantined, and all sorts of mayhem was going on. Now, I remembered just that these guys had shown up, and that one day they had actually given me a camera, but somebody pushed me around. So I had done a tour of the camp, and all I remembered was that the word "people" was in the name of this organization, but that's as far as I could remember. But then Nicole, she kind of like started researching.
Nicole's a sleuth here then. You
Oh,
uncovered this footage?
I did. I was determined, I mean, just the thought that here there might be, footage that Jim shot himself was incredibly enticing. And it took me a long time. I kept looking and looking. I couldn't find anything that referenced, a video collective with the word people in the title, until finally somebody digitized an old magazine about radical video collectives in New York in the 70s. And in the very back, there was a little ad that said, crabs outbreak at Camp Jeanette for the handicapped, $6.95. So indeed, it was this amazing collective of folks, and I was able to track down somebody with the same name as one of those guys, who was working on the board of a radical bookstore in San Francisco. And that bookstore said, well, we're not going to connect you with him directly, but we'll leave him a note if you want. So I literally went over there and left a note saying, we're interested in making a documentary, and I'm with Jim Lebrecht, and he went to the camp, and could you please contact us? And we were literally sitting there in our office planning a film shoot with actors, and how were we going to make that happen when this email popped up, Yes, we have 5.5 hours of footage, and we're midway through transferring it at the Bay Area Video Coalition through a government grant to archive this early kind of video, because it was the very first Portapak video, a brand new portable video. And these guys had a philosophy that was so much like ours in terms of, using storytelling for community empowerment. And so we arranged to meet at a cafe in San Francisco. And when we walked in to meet Howard Gutstadt, who you actually see him in the film. He's there with the camera person, Ben Levine. He literally burst into tears when he saw Jim, because I think if you win in 1971 and we're hoping to empower communities, and then you saw, what that had led to 50 years later, one of these kids is actually picking up the camera and telling the story himself. It really was moving, and they were incredible partners throughout the whole process.
Kismet, just amazing. What an amazing story. The chance of that, and kudos to you for doing that. And that is so important too, because that shows this is a camp like any other summer camp. These kids are rolling. In fact, this this camp is a little raunchier than most summer camps I know. This is pretty wild, this place you went to, Jim.
More fun would be.
Yeah. But it wasn't the only footage you incorporate here. And as you alluded to earlier about the Civil Rights Disability Act and all of that and that movement, and done by Judy Newman and others that went to the camp and then kept fighting for it years later, trying to get this thing passed, including the sit-in that you have footage of, and some harrowing footage at Willowbrook State School and things. You incorporated into this to take this idea of talking about Crip Camp and taking it to a bigger place here.
I mean, that was our dream. Our dream was that we could bring you into the camp in an immersive way, and that the viewer would almost feel like they were a camper. So they would fall in love with folks at camp. They would make friends. They would stop seeing disability the way that our very poorly representative media has really painted disability, and start to see it as just part of the spectrum of, you know, human existence. And then with that perspective, we could show you how the disability rights movement evolved in a really radical way, because I think across history, too many people have the sense that the ADA, for instance, was some kind of charity that was, you know, given to people with disabilities, and not enough people understand how it was fought for, how tenaciously and how boldly and how brilliantly and strategically it was fought for. So the way to make people see that and to overcome a lot of the prejudice that people had, we thought, was to make people see that history through the eyes of their friends. And so piecing together that archival footage was so hard because it was so forgotten. And we were literally taking a shot from, you know, maybe one reporter had shot something inside the building where this epic sit-in took place. We would take one shot from one old tape we found in the bottom of a box, and then another shot from somebody's old DVD, and kind of piece them together to try to give a feeling that you were continuing the journey in that similar immersive way that you had been at the camp, you know?
And Jim, talk about the, you know, every good documentary, I say it's a matter of casting sometimes, who you're going to focus on, the characters you choose to talk to, the interviews that you did, the new interviews 50 years later. Jim, talk about that with many of the people that you certainly know here that became a kind of endearing cast that we got to know then and now, actually.
Yeah, well, first off, I you know, I would say that I'm one of those characters, and that for me, I really had a vested interest in not leaving anything behind, and that it was important to really try to be as truthful as I possibly could be about my personal experience. And that's what you got from everybody. And sitting there and interviewing people like Judy Heumann or Denise Scherer Jacobson, it was a remarkable experience being behind the camera for both of us as we're interviewing these people, because you got a sense that they realized that this was an opportunity to really tell the most important stories of their lives as examples of what the experience is of living with a disability and how that relates to how we are in society. That we are people who get high, who, you know, are sexually active, who get into trouble. and but in the long run, you know, it's a ruckus, wonderful community. But what do we see in media so often is tragedy or some extraordinary story of overcoming all the odds. Whereas in reality, we're everyday people. And I think that you get to see that in our film.
You know, and I think keeping the title, which some people might look at the title in this very politically correct age and go, what? Crip Camp? I think that gives you ownership of this in a way, and keeping it. And congratulations for making that decision to do that.
I mean, every community kind of has their language and their, you know, the words that they may use. And for us, it was reclaiming the word cripple. And not everybody likes it. Not everybody's happy with it, the title within the community. But for the most part, it is a way that I certainly identify when I'm talking to other people. And if it's part of my slang or saying, hey, there's a Crip spot up ahead, let's see if we can get there before somebody else, it means there's a blue zone up ahead when we're driving. And but also, it really does speak to that this isn't like another kind of film. That
Yeah.
it's, that there's real edge to it.
So you did no less than get the Obamas involved in this. I mean, amazing, considering where you were starting, like going like, what are we going to do? And where's this idea coming from that started with Jim, goes all the way up to the president of the United States, former president, and his wife, and their deal, which happens to be with Netflix, Higher Ground, won the Academy Award first time out with American Factory last year. Talk about, did they simply see this at Sundance, or were they involved before? How did this come about, Nicole?
They were actually involved very early on. I mean, we had sort of a trailer, and then we were starting to cut together an assembly. When our very brilliant executive producer Howard Gertler read in the trades that the Higher Ground deal with Netflix had been created, and at that point, I don't believe the Obamas had actually hired anyone to run the company. And so then when it was subsequently announced that Priya Swaminathan had been hired, Howard said, we have to get this to her because Judy Heumann worked in the State Department with President Obama. And the film itself and the story, crosses over so many themes and values that I think the Obamas hold dear: the grassroots organizing, the power of young people to change the world. And we knew that one of their missions was to sort of find and tell untold stories. So we were able to get a short teaser to Priya at the Toronto Film Festival through our sales agent. And she said, well, we're not looking for anything. It's too early. We're still trying to figure out kind of what our company is doing. And then called back and said, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is incredible. And flew up to Berkeley and spent time with Jim and I. And we had a great conversation in which she said something that just captured our heart. She said, I think you guys have a culture changing project. And that was the moment when we thought we have to make this happen. And luckily she called us right after that and said, we think this story needs to be told, and you're the right people to tell it. And we want to roll up our sleeves and do it with you. And the president and Mrs. Obama feel the same way. So they actually were very active EPs. The president and Mrs. Obama watched several cuts of the documentary and gave feedback, which is incredible. And they were very respectful kind of, of our agency and voice in telling the story. And it's been like a dream partnership. And for us to have access to a platform that prestigious and that large for this story, which has been ignored for so long, it's been incredible. We still, to be honest, are pinching ourselves that it's happened.
Wow. I mean, that's interesting what you said, that they watched several cuts and maybe had some ideas. Were you afraid to say, that's a terrible idea? I don't want
I wouldn't have said that.
So you went with their cut?
No, they weren't. The notes never came from that place, actually. They came from more of a like, have you thought about this? Have you considered that? Here's some questions we have, that kind of thing. But we really did feel like we had ownership over the story.
So amazing. I mentioned that this movie started out winning awards at the Sundance Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award, which I think sometimes is the best award to win, because there you're appealing and you see you really have something with people on the front lines of watching movies. So what was that like? What was that experience at Sundance like? And then to win that award, Jim, well, your first film as a director, what would that be like?
I sometimes have a hard time talking about this without bursting into tears, to be honest with you, because it was such an incredible experience. First off, we had a funder, Michael Chow, who helped pay for virtually everybody that you see in the film come out to Sundance, to Park City. And so opening night, as the credits are rolling, the audience was seeing all these people kind of coming on the stage, and you could see these silhouettes of wheelchairs and Dennis Phillips with his, and all these different folks, and the lights came up, and there was a standing ovation that had been going on. And then as the Q&A happened, the first time that Judy Heumann answered a question, standing ovation. And Pete, let me tell you, as a sound designer, it's one of the loudest things I've ever heard in my life.
Wow, really?
And so it was an extraordinary, it was a very emotional moment in which, and I think Corbett said something, I think you remember, Nicole, what that might have been, but to who's in the film, but you got a sense that maybe finally people with disabilities have really arrived in regards to recognition of us as a community and and a social movement. Um, and then, well, winning the award was really wonderful.
That's gotta mean a lot. I mean, you've won Emmys and things, Nicole, but how did that compare?
Oh my God, it was incredible. I mean, for one thing, for the very first time, there was a ramp to the
Oh,
stage,
is that right?
at the
Wow.
audience, yeah, at the Sundance Audience Awards. And I think the feeling of Jim and I going up the ramp together, it felt so good. In fact, they were celebrating John Cooper, the programmer, that year because he was leaving, and there were a bunch of dancers, and they innovated a whole kind of cartwheel routine up and down the ramp, and it just felt like, here's this thing. I mean, it's amazing, right? That it's 2020, and that ground needs to be broken. That an award stage like that is made accessible. But the fact that it happened felt really, really joyous. And I will say that, like, wandering around the streets of Park City with the folks in the film and having them being treated, as celebrities, and everybody kind of wanting to rush up to them and talk to them and take pictures with them and selfies and all of that. I mean, I think we all felt like the new ground was being broken. And I remember Judy Heumann texted us and said, I hope that you are enjoying watching the expressions on the faces of the people whom you have awakened, because it really felt like that. People kept saying to us things like, you've broken down the barriers, you've made me see things in a different way. And isn't that like why we fight so hard and work for years to make films, is to try to achieve that? So it was something.
And that is why movies have such power and can be so important to carry this on to people who may never have thought about it before, but now do. So I have to congratulate both of you. Jim, for coming up with this, wouldn't be there without you, and your collaboration with Nicole. Congratulations, and thank you so much for joining us today on Half Hour With. And I just want to thank everybody out there. Again, if you haven't seen the film, I guarantee you're going to want to see it now. And thank you for joining us, and to Netflix too, for making this film available to us and to everyone else. So thank you so much, and bye. Thanks.